Most people have a running internal commentary that tells them when they're getting it wrong. It says things like, "You're not good enough, you're falling behind, you'll probably fail, and honestly, who do you think you are?" And the most unsettling part isn't what it says, it's that it sounds completely like your own thoughts. It uses first person. It feels like honest self-assessment. It feels like you being real with yourself. But here's what the research tells us. The inner critic is not you. It is a pattern of thinking your brain learned, usually very early in life, in response to the environment you grew up in. It is a voice that got so thoroughly absorbed that it began to speak in first person. And understanding that distinction, that the critic is something you learned, not something you are, is where everything starts to change. The inner critic has its roots in childhood attachment and the environments where we first learned what we needed to do, be, or avoid in order to be loved and kept safe. Children's brains are extraordinarily sensitive to social signals. They are wired to monitor their caregivers' responses and adapt accordingly. It is a survival mechanism. When a child grows up in an environment where love feels conditional, where praise comes rarely and criticism comes freely, where mistakes are punished rather than explored, where being quiet or small or useful is what earns connection, the brain develops a self-monitoring system. It starts watching the child from the outside, criticizing before others can, shrinking them before the world does. What begins as a protective adaptation becomes, over years, a deeply embedded internal voice. Developmental psychologists call this process internalization. The child takes in the voices, expectations, and judgments of their caregivers and makes them their own. The external voice becomes internal, and by adulthood, it feels entirely native. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and extended by researchers like Mary Ainsworth and Mary Main, gives us a detailed map of how early relational experiences shape our internal world. Children who grow up with caregivers who are reliably warm, responsive, and emotionally available tend to develop what is called a secure attachment. They internalize a sense that they are fundamentally lovable and that the world is broadly safe. Children who grow up with caregivers who are critical, inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, or unpredictable tend to develop insecure attachment patterns. And one of the hallmarks of these patterns is a harsher, louder inner critic. When you couldn't rely on someone outside to regulate your sense of safety and worth, you developed an internal system for doing it. And that system often sounds like criticism. This isn't a character flaw, it is the logical output of a brain that was doing its best in the conditions it was given. Understanding this is not an invitation to blame your caregivers indefinitely. It is an invitation to have some compassion for the child who needed this voice to survive. The inner critic does not only come from our immediate families, it is also shaped by culture, education, and the wider world we grew up in. Schools that prioritized performance over process, cultures that equated worth with productivity, body size, achievement, or status. Religious environments that emphasized shame or unworthiness. Peer groups where fitting in required suppressing your authentic self. All of these voices get absorbed and become part of the internal critical chorus. This is particularly relevant for people from marginalized communities, where messages about inadequacy or not belonging have been reinforced by systems and institutions, not just individuals. The inner critic, in these cases, is not just a personal habit. It is internalized social messaging, doing its damage from the inside. Naming these wider sources matters because it widens our compassion. You did not choose to absorb these messages. They were delivered to you by systems that had far more power than you did. Recognizing this does not make the critic less painful, but it does make it less personal. One of the most disorienting things about the inner critic is how true it feels. When it speaks, it doesn't feel like a distorted pattern or an internalized voice from childhood. It feels like honest, clear-eyed self-assessment. This is by design. The inner critic speaks in first person. It uses the word I. It presents itself as the most honest, unfiltered version of you, the one that tells you what others are too polite to say. It often arrives in moments of stress or vulnerability, when our defenses are down and we are most susceptible to believing what we're told. Psychologists use the term cognitive fusion to describe this state, when we become so merged with our thoughts that we treat them as facts rather than mental events. The thoughts feel real because we are having them, but the inner critic's thoughts are not facts. They are learned patterns, running automatically, presenting themselves as facts. Separating yourself from those thoughts, even slightly, is one of the most powerful moves available in this work. This is the part that often surprises people. The inner critic was, at one point, trying to help you. It formed in environments where being hard on yourself served a function. It kept you one step ahead of others' disapproval. It kept you working harder to earn love. It kept you small in a world where being visible felt dangerous. In internal family systems therapy developed by Richard Schwartz, every internal part, including the harshest inner critic, is understood to have a positive intention at its origin, even if its current behavior is damaging. The critic was a protector. It was doing its best with what it knew. Understanding this changes how we relate to the critic. Instead of trying to destroy it or wage war against it, the therapeutic goal becomes, can you appreciate what this part once tried to do and then gently begin to update it? The critic doesn't need to be annihilated. It needs to learn that you are safe now and that you have other resources available for protection. You cannot change what you cannot see, and most people spend years, sometimes decades, living under the critic's commentary without recognizing it as a distinct voice at all. It just feels like reality. It just feels like how things are. The first step in any serious work with the inner critic is recognition, learning to notice when the voice is speaking, to identify its characteristic phrases, and to begin the process of separating it from your own genuine thoughts and values. Mindfulness-based approaches, acceptance and commitment therapy, and compassion-focused therapy all begin in this same place: awareness before change. You might start by simply noticing, when does the critic speak most loudly? After a mistake? In social situations? When you look in the mirror? When you compare yourself to others? That awareness, that map of the critic's territory, is the beginning of reclaiming ground. You cannot heal what you cannot see, and you are beginning to see it. The inner critic formed without your consent. You did not sit down as a child and decide to internalize a harsh, relentless voice that would follow you into adulthood and comment on everything you do. It happened because you were a child in a world that was bigger than you, and your brain did what it needed to do to keep you connected and safe. You did not choose this, but you are not stuck with it either. The research on neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to change throughout life, is genuinely hopeful. Patterns that were learned can be unlearned, or more accurately, supplemented by new patterns. New voices can be developed. A kinder, more accurate internal narrator can be cultivated, not by forcing positivity, but by doing the slow, honest work of recognizing the critic, understanding its origins, questioning its authority, and gradually choosing differently. This is not a quick process, it is not a linear one, but it is possible. And the fact that you are here, engaging with this material, means you have already started. The rest of this series builds on this foundation. You know where the voice came from. Now the work is learning to let it go.